Let's jump right into it, shall we? As a historian, I find that one of the most fascinating aspects of early Islamic history is exactly how the nascent Islamic State survived its absolute greatest existential crisis following the passing of its founder, Prophet Muhammad. In today's Explainer, we're going to put on our historian hats and really examine the crisis management strategies of the very first Caliph, Hazrat Abu Bakr. Because what we're looking at here is literally a masterclass in leadership during a transition that was just totally fraught with internal grief and external threats. Now, think about this core structural dilemma for a second. How exactly does a nascent state survive the loss of its founder? You've got this newly unified community, right? And it's held together almost entirely by the charisma and authority of a single visionary. So when that founder passes away, it creates this massive, gaping power vacuum that threatens to just tear the entire community apart. Survival in this situation? It is absolutely not guaranteed. So here is our syllabus for today's historical case study. First, a state in crisis. Then, the foundation of trust, calming the succession chaos, executing prior commands, quelling internal rebellions, and finally, the humble statesman. All right, let's start with part 1, a state in crisis. You really have to picture the scene to understand the stark contrast here. On one hand, you have this intense, raw, emotional chaos. The shock was so profound that even a giant of a man like Hazrat Umar was completely overcome with grief. He was literally roaming around uncontrollably with a drawn sword, just unable to process the loss. And it's a totally understandable human reaction. Yet, on the other hand, you have Abu Bakr. He arrived, instantly assessed the volatility of the room, and acted with profound wisdom and stabilizing diplomacy. He somehow managed to ground the community back in reality, gently but firmly reminding them that the message fundamentally outlives the messenger. Moving right along to part 2, the foundation of trust. Now, as historians, we have to ask, why did the community listen to him? Well, the crucial point is his unmatched historical loyalty. I mean, look at the track record. He was the very first man to accept Islam, immediately bringing 40,000 dirhams to the cause and constantly freeing slaves. Then you have those 3 harrowing days and nights he spent in the Cave of Thor during the migration. Fast forward to the Battle of Badr. When they needed someone to stand guard over the Prophet, it was Abu Bakr who stepped right up as the ultimate shield, sword drawn. And, crucially, in the year 10 AH, during the Prophet's final illness, it was Abu Bakr who was specifically appointed to lead the community in 17 prayers. So this incredible track record, it isn't just trivia. It's the absolute bedrock of his political capital and moral authority. To really grasp the depth of this bond, we have to zoom in on a very specific, incredible anecdote from the Cave of Thor. When they were hiding in there, Abu Bakr actually tore up his own clothing to plug these little holes in the cave to protect against snakes and scorpions. And he plugged the very last hole with his own toe. While the Prophet rested on his lap, a venomous creature bit that exact toe. But Abu Bakr, he endured the agonizing pain in absolute silence, just so he wouldn't wake him. It was only when his silent tears of pain accidentally fell onto the Prophet's cheek that the Prophet woke up. It's this level of extreme, selfless devotion that cemented a totally unbreakable trust with the community. And we see this exact same spirit again later, during the preparations for the Battle of Tabuk. This was a time of huge financial hardship, and a call went out for funds. Hazrat Umar, thinking he might finally, outdo Abu Bakr for once, brought half of his entire household's wealth. A massive contribution. But then Abu Bakr arrived having brought absolutely everything he owned. Literally everything. When he was asked what he had left for his family, he delivered this iconic historical quote, "I left Allah and His Messenger for them." With that one sentence, he cemented himself as the ultimate standard of sacrifice. Which brings us to part 3, calming the succession chaos. Let's break down the strategy here because it is brilliant. While the community was literally still reeling from the loss, a fierce political debate over leadership just erupted among the Ansar. Now, if left unchecked, this could have fractured the nascent state permanently. Game over. But Abu Bakr's response was incredibly swift. He arrived promptly on the scene with Hazrat Umar, and here's the genius part. Instead of just walking in and asserting dominance, he employed exceptional emotional intelligence. He acknowledged the merits of the different factions, used stabilizing diplomacy, and peacefully resolved a massive, massive potential conflict. What could have easily been a violent schism is instead recorded by us historians as a golden achievement in early Islamic statecraft. Let's look at part 4, executing prior commands. So before his passing, the Prophet had formed a military expedition to secure the northern borders. And what's really fascinating here is the commander, Usama bin Zaid, who was only 17 years old at the time. The expedition had been delayed due to the Prophet's illness. But now, with the state in this incredibly vulnerable transition period, some senior companions raised some very serious practical objections. They were basically saying, hey, are we sure we want to dispatch our primary defensive force, especially when led by a teenager, away from the capital right now? Despite intense pressure to keep the army in Medina for protection, Abu Bakr demonstrated this totally unwavering commitment to institutional continuity. His response was resolute. He simply said, "How can I stop an army ordered by the Prophet?" And he ordered them out immediately after the burial. Now, this was a bold display of confidence, and it signaled to the surrounding empires that this new state was absolutely not weak. And history tells us that gamble paid off. The army returned entirely triumphant.
Moving to Part 5, Quelling Internal Rebellions.
Now we see a fascinating shift. We witness his rapid transition from a soft-spoken companion to an absolute unyielding commander-in-chief. He faced two massive internal threats almost immediately. First, you had the rise of false prophets trying to carve out their own pockets of power. Abu Bakr handled this systematically, organizing targeted military campaigns to eliminate those threats. But the second threat was perhaps even more dangerous. Entire tribes decided they were just going to stop paying zakat, the mandatory alms. They tried to argue it was just a personal tribute to the Prophet that expired with his death. Well, Abu Bakr took a fierce zero-tolerance policy on this. He declared that refusing the state tax made them liable to be fought, a very strict legal categorization known as wajibul qital. He understood brilliantly that allowing them to withhold taxes would completely dissolve the central authority of the state. And within just a single year, he had completely pacified the rebellion and secured the state's foundational pillars. Finally, Part 6, The Humble Statesman. Okay, despite holding absolute power over a rapidly expanding state, you just have to look at his personal lifestyle. The very day after becoming caliph, the most powerful man around took some shawls and headed straight to the local market to trade, literally just to feed his family. Hazrat Omar actually had to physically stop him, explaining that, running the state required his full attention. So Abu Ubaidah arranged a stipend from the state treasury, the Bayt al-Mal, but Abu Bakr insisted it be the absolute bare minimum required for basic survival. And get this, his absolute power didn't stop his community service for a second. Before dawn, the ruler of the Islamic State would quietly go and sweep the house of a blind old woman in Medina. He would even still go out and milk the goats for local orphan girls. It's just astonishing. He viewed his leadership strictly as a public service, nothing more. His character is beautifully encapsulated in this one historical account. Once, the Prophet was sitting with the companions and asked 4 questions. Who is fasting today? Who visited a sick person today? Who fed a poor person today? And who prayed a funeral prayer today? For every single question, while the others remained silent, Abu Bakr stood up and said, "I did." Completing all of these acts of public welfare and personal devotion in a single day prompted the Prophet to declare that he rightfully deserved Jannah, or paradise. When Hazrat Abu Bakr passed away at the age of 63, fittingly on a Monday, and buried right next to the Prophet, he left behind an absolutely incredible legacy of statecraft. But materially, he left virtually nothing. His final directive to his daughter Aisha was to take his remaining state-issued assets and return them to the incoming caliph, Hazrat Umar. So what exactly were these grand assets of the most powerful man in the region? A single camel, 1 large eating bowl, and 2 shawls. That was literally the whole shebang. I'll leave you with this final provocative thought as we wrap up today's explainer. When you study historical crisis management, does this model prove that the absolute strongest leaders, the ones who can wield an iron will to enforce state security and collect taxes, are actually the most effective when they concurrently act as the most humble, impoverished servants of their people? It's a fascinating paradigm of power, isn't it? Thanks for joining me on this historical deep dive.